Power of Self-Love. Introduction. In a world constantly demanding our attention, measuring our worth through external validation, and pushing us to compare ourselves to others, the concept of self-love has become both revolutionary and necessary. Yet it remains one of the most misunderstood and underpracticed principles of emotional well-being. The power of self-love begins by challenging the cultural narrative that prioritizes productivity over peace, perfection over authenticity, and people-pleasing over personal truth. It asks an urgent question: how can we ever feel fulfilled, connected, or whole if we do not first build a solid relationship with ourselves? This book's introduction invites the reader to reflect on how often we outsource our value, to social media, to relationships, to our achievements, and how rarely we turn inward to recognize that our inherent worth is not something we earn, but something we uncover. Self-love, as presented here, is not indulgent or narcissistic. It is foundational. It is the quiet decision to honor our needs, accept our imperfections, and treat ourselves with the same compassion we often reserve for others. Through this lens, self-love becomes not just a personal virtue but an act of quiet resistance against the voices that told us we're not enough. The introduction explores how deeply rooted insecurities, often stemming from childhood, societal pressure, or past emotional wounds, can cloud our self-perception and keep us in a loop of self-criticism, self-abandonment, and burnout. Many of us have been taught to tie our value to our output, to silence our emotions in favor of appearing strong, or to ignore our limits just to be liked. We applaud overworking and self-sacrifice while silently suffering from anxiety, loneliness, and self-doubt. But when we start to approach ourselves with kindness instead of criticism, when we begin to listen to our feelings rather than suppress them, and when we trust our inner voice instead of silencing it, we step into a radically different way of being, one where we are safe with ourselves. This book introduces self-love as a practice, not a destination, something built gradually through choices, boundaries, habits, and healing, rather than something achieved all at once. The introduction gently sets the tone for the journey ahead, encouraging readers to let go of perfection and instead embrace progress. It acknowledges that many people feel uncomfortable even thinking about loving themselves, especially if they've spent years being their own harshest critic. But it also assures them that change is possible, that self-love is learnable, that our relationship with ourselves can heal, and that doing so is not only liberating but transformative. By exploring common barriers to self-love, like guilt, shame, comparison, fear of rejection, or the belief that we must be flawless to be worthy, the book begins to dismantle those inner walls and make space for a more compassionate and empowering inner narrative. It offers hope, not in the form of motivational slogans but through grounded truth, that you are not too broken, too late, or too far gone to begin this work. You are exactly where you need to be, and the act of picking up this book is already a step toward healing. The introduction also clarifies that self-love is not about becoming selfish or shutting others out. It's about showing up more fully for life by first tending to the inner self. It's about cultivating emotional resilience, building healthier relationships, and living with greater intention and authenticity. When you treat yourself with love, the ripple effect touches everything: your work, your friendships, your family, your goals. You start making decisions not from fear or people-pleasing, but from alignment with your values and needs. The introduction ends by inviting readers to open their minds and hearts to this transformative concept, even if it feels unfamiliar or uncomfortable at first. It reminds us that self-love is not a luxury, it is a basic human need. Without it, everything else rests on shaky ground. But with it, we begin to anchor into a sense of inner peace that no external achievement can give us. The power of self-love doesn't promise perfection, it promises presence. It doesn't offer quick fixes, it offers lasting change through deep, honest self-connection. As this introduction gently but powerfully affirms, the journey to loving yourself might not be easy, but it will be worth it, and it might just be the most important journey you'll ever take. Chapter 1. What is self-love? Self-love, though often spoken about in social media captions and motivational quotes, is one of the most misunderstood and overlooked practices in the journey toward emotional well-being, and Chapter 1 begins by stripping away the common myths that surround it, because self-love is not about vanity, arrogance, or thinking you are better than others. Rather, it is about recognizing your intrinsic worth, honoring your humanity, and treating yourself with the same kindness, patience, and respect that you so readily offer to others. At its core, self-love is a deep, personal commitment to being on your own side no matter what. It is the quiet strength behind setting boundaries, the inner peace that comes from not needing to prove your value, and the daily courage to choose yourself, even when the world encourages you to abandon who you truly are for the sake of approval or fitting in. The chapter starts by exploring how most people confuse self-love with selfishness, self-centeredness, or indulgence when in truth, it is one of the most selfless acts a person can practice. Because when you are rooted in love for yourself, you show up in the world as a healthier, more whole, more generous version of who you really are. This kind of love isn't loud or showy, it's a quiet, constant presence in your life, influencing the choices you make, the way you talk to yourself, and the standards you set for how others treat you. Self-love manifests not just in the way you think about yourself, but in your habits. Choosing rest when you're tired instead of pushing through burnout, saying no when something doesn't feel right instead of betraying your own needs, feeding your body with care, being honest about your feelings, and forgiving yourself when you make mistakes instead of tearing yourself down. This chapter also emphasizes that self-love is not something that magically appears one day. It's a practice, an unfolding, a series of small but powerful decisions made every day. It grows through awareness, through healing past wounds, through unlearning toxic beliefs about what makes us valuable, and through choosing to speak to ourselves with compassion, even when our inner critic screams otherwise. We are conditioned from an early age to seek validation from others, to chase approval, achievement, and perfection in hopes of finally feeling worthy, but self-love disrupts that conditioning by saying, you don't need to earn your worth because you already have it. This truth can feel radical to those who have spent years believing they are not enough unless they are productive, successful, attractive, or constantly pleasing others. The chapter challenges this mindset head-on and asks, what if you are already enough simply because you exist? It takes time to accept this truth, especially in a society that profits from our insecurities, but self-love begins the moment you stop seeing yourself as a project to fix and start seeing yourself as a person to care for. Chapter 1 encourages readers to reflect on how they currently relate to themselves. Do they trust their own voice or do they doubt themselves at every turn? Do they treat their mistakes with grace or with harsh judgment? Do they feel at home in their own skin, or are they constantly trying to become someone else? These questions are not meant to shame, but to invite honesty, because self-love can only grow in the light of awareness. The chapter introduces the idea that self-love is layered. It includes self-acceptance, self-respect, self-awareness, self-compassion, and self-care. These layers support each other. When you begin to accept who you are without needing to change or hide, you naturally begin to treat yourself better, listen to your inner needs more attentively, and build a life that reflects your truth rather than your fears. Self-love doesn't mean you never want to grow or improve. It means that your growth is fueled by love, not by shame or insecurity. You can want to be healthier, more focused, more compassionate, or more disciplined, but still love who you are now in this moment. That's the paradox. Most people struggle with how to love yourself while also wanting to evolve. But this chapter makes it clear that self-love isn't the enemy of self-growth. It is the very foundation of it. When you love yourself, you stop chasing things to fill a void, and you start creating from a place of wholeness. You stop abandoning your needs to gain acceptance, and you start honoring yourself in everything you do. This chapter closes by making it clear that self-love is not a destination or a perfect state of being. It's a practice, a process, a relationship with yourself that will have ups and downs. Some days you will feel deeply connected to yourself. Other days you might fall into old patterns of self-doubt or self-criticism. But every time you return to yourself with kindness, you are strengthening the roots of that love. You are building trust with the most important person in your life, you. This chapter invites the reader to release the idea that self-love is about always feeling confident or happy with yourself, and instead embrace the truth that self-love is about being committed to your own well-being, even when it's hard. It is about saying, I am on my own side no matter what. In this way, Chapter 1 lays the foundation for everything else that follows, because until you understand what self-love truly is, not a feeling but a practice of care, respect, and compassion, everything else you try to build in your life will be on shaky ground. Real self-love is quiet but powerful, gentle but unshakable, and once you begin to live from this place, everything changes, not because the world becomes easier but because you become more rooted in your own truth, your own worth, and your own love. Chapter 2. The Roots of Self-Doubt. Self-doubt, that quiet yet persistent voice that tells us we're not good enough, smart enough, attractive enough, or worthy enough, doesn't appear out of nowhere. It has roots, often deep ones, that were planted in our early experiences, shaped by our environment, our relationships, and the messages we absorbed long before we knew how to question them. In Chapter 2, The Roots of Self-Doubt, we begin an honest and compassionate exploration of where our insecurities come from and how they silently shape the way we see ourselves and navigate the world. From childhood, we are highly impressionable, and the way we are treated by parents, teachers, caregivers, and peers forms the foundation of our self-concept. If we were consistently encouraged, nurtured, and emotionally validated, we're more likely to develop inner confidence, but for many the reality is quite different. Whether through overt criticism or subtle neglect, many of us received the message that love had to be earned, that we needed to be good, quiet, helpful, perfect, or high-achieving to be seen, valued, or safe. These conditional forms of acceptance begin to take root in the psyche and evolve into self-doubt as we grow. A child who is constantly corrected but rarely praised may grow into an adult who doubts every decision. A child whose emotions were dismissed or shamed may become someone who distrusts their feelings. A child compared to others may internalize the belief that they are never enough. These beliefs, although often subconscious, can become the invisible script by which we live our lives. This chapter explores how such early experiences silently build the framework for how we view ourselves in adulthood, how we approach relationships, careers, creativity, and personal goals, and how they show up as imposter syndrome, fear of failure, perfectionism, or a constant need for approval. It also delves into the cultural and societal systems that fuel self-doubt, particularly how media, advertising, and social expectations teach us to measure our worth by impossible standards, by our appearance, wealth, productivity, or popularity. We're conditioned to believe we must constantly improve, upgrade, or fix ourselves to be lovable or successful. This creates a relentless cycle of comparison and inadequacy, where we are rarely present with ourselves as we are and instead feel stuck in a loop of almost there but never quite. The chapter encourages readers to pause and question, who taught you to doubt yourself? Whose voice do you hear when you hesitate to speak up, take a risk, or believe in your abilities? Often we carry the internalized voices of others, sometimes well-meaning, sometimes harmful, and confuse them with our own truth. But self-doubt isn't always loud. Sometimes it disguises itself as humility, practicality, or logic. It might whisper, play it safe, don't get your hopes up, or you're not the type of person who can do that, and because these thoughts feel familiar we rarely challenge them. This chapter shines a light on these mental habits and shows that self-doubt is not a personality trait. It is a learned response, a protective mechanism that once served us but now limits us. Understanding the roots of self-doubt doesn't mean placing blame but rather reclaiming our power. It means recognizing that while we didn't choose these early influences, we can choose how we respond to them now. Chapter 2 offers exercises and reflections to help readers trace the origin of their self-doubt, identify the patterns it has created, and begin separating their current self from the outdated narratives they've inherited. It emphasizes that healing begins with awareness, not to judge ourselves, but to understand the story we've been living so we can rewrite it from a place of truth and compassion. This chapter also gently addresses the emotional impact of chronic self-doubt, how it can lead to anxiety, avoidance, overthinking, and emotional exhaustion, and how it often keeps us from pursuing the very things that would bring us fulfillment. It highlights that we don't need to be completely confident to act. We only need a willingness to question the lie that says we are not enough. Each time we take a small, brave step, whether it's speaking our truth, applying for a job, setting a boundary, or simply acknowledging our feelings, we weaken the grip of self-doubt and reinforce a new belief, that we are capable, resilient, and worthy. The chapter closes with the reminder that self-doubt does not mean something is wrong with us. It means we have internalized messages that no longer serve us. These messages can be unlearned, and their power over us can be dismantled. With time, patience, and intentional self-love, we can create a new internal narrative, one where our voice is not filled with fear or criticism, but encouragement, clarity, and trust. Chapter 2 invites the reader to begin this process with gentle curiosity, understanding that uncovering the roots of self-doubt is not about reliving old wounds, but about releasing them so we can grow beyond them. When we know where our self-doubt comes from, we can meet it with empathy instead of shame, and that simple act can be the beginning of profound inner freedom. Chapter 3, The Inner Critic versus Inner Compassion, dives deep into one of the most crucial dynamics shaping our self-perception and emotional well-being, the constant inner dialogue between the harsh, often unforgiving voice of the inner critic and the gentle, supportive guidance of inner compassion. This chapter begins by helping the reader identify the inner critic, that persistent voice within those shames, judges, blames, and undermines our sense of worth. It's the voice that says, "You're not good enough, you always mess up, why would anyone love you?" or "You're going to fail." Often we mistake this inner critic for truth or realism, but it is a learned voice, shaped by past experiences, unresolved trauma, and external influences like overly critical parents, harsh teachers, toxic relationships, or societal standards that taught us love must be earned through flawlessness and performance. The inner critic speaks with the language of fear, aiming to keep us small, cautious, and supposedly safe, but in doing so, it keeps us stuck, ashamed, and disconnected from our true selves. It attacks not just our actions but our identity, leading us to internalize negative beliefs and treat ourselves with a level of cruelty we would never direct at others. This chapter encourages readers to recognize how automatic and ingrained this voice can be, how it often disguises itself as motivation, pushing us to be better or avoid mistakes, but ultimately fuels anxiety, perfectionism, burnout, and chronic self-doubt. Yet, as powerful as the inner critic may seem, it is not the only voice inside us. Within each person is also a source of inner compassion, a quieter, more nurturing voice often drowned out by years of criticism and self-rejection. The inner compassionate voice does not ignore mistakes or pretend everything is perfect. Rather, it responds to our struggles with understanding, patience, and encouragement. It says things like, "It's okay to make mistakes, you're doing your best," or, "You are still worthy even when you fall short." Cultivating inner compassion doesn't mean becoming passive or unaccountable. Instead, it means becoming an ally to yourself, acknowledging pain without judgment and meeting imperfection with kindness. This chapter introduces the concept that we can actually rewire our relationship with ourselves by shifting from criticism to compassion, and that doing so is not weakness, it's one of the bravest, most healing acts we can offer ourselves. The chapter explains how inner compassion is essential for real growth because it creates a safe internal space where we can be honest, take risks, and try again after failure without the crippling weight of shame. It allows us to treat our setbacks as part of being human, not as proof that we are broken. Through relatable examples and reflective insights, the chapter shows how self-compassion leads to better emotional regulation, healthier relationships, more authentic decision-making, and a deeper sense of self-worth. One powerful idea emphasized here is that compassion is a skill, not a personality trait. It can be learned, practiced, and strengthened through awareness and intentional self-talk. Readers are guided to notice their self-talk patterns, to pause when the inner critic arises and to ask, "Would I say this to someone I love?" This small but powerful question reveals how harshly we treat ourselves compared to how we treat others. Often, we offer kindness and encouragement to friends going through challenges yet deny ourselves that same understanding. The chapter encourages the reader to begin offering that same compassion inward, to speak to themselves like they would to a beloved friend. The goal is not to silence the inner critic entirely, as that voice usually developed to protect us in some way, but to shift the balance of power, to let the voice of compassion become louder, stronger, and more influential in the choices we make. By understanding the function of the inner critic, which often stems from past pain, fear, or attempts to gain control, we can begin to heal it, not by fighting it, but by listening with curiosity, challenging its assumptions, and responding with empathy rather than shame. This practice, though unfamiliar at first, becomes transformative with time. We begin to internalize a new voice, one that supports instead of sabotages, forgives instead of punishes, and uplifts instead of diminishes. The chapter explores the emotional relief that comes from this shift, not having to constantly perform or prove your worth but instead feeling safe to just be. It reminds the reader that self-love is not built on perfection. It's built on presence, and that compassionate presence is what allows us to change, to grow, and to thrive without fear of rejection from ourselves. The chapter also addresses a common resistance to inner compassion, the belief that being too kind to ourselves will make us lazy, unmotivated, or weak. In response, it presents evidence and real-life examples showing that compassion enhances resilience, fosters deeper accountability, and encourages more consistent and sustainable personal growth. People who feel loved, especially by themselves, are more likely to care for their health, take positive risks, and bounce back from challenges. Finally, Chapter 3 closes with an invitation to practice self-compassion daily, especially in moments of struggle or failure. Whether through journaling, affirmations, mindfulness, or simply pausing to breathe and speak kindly to oneself, the chapter encourages the reader to make compassion their new default response. It affirms that every time we choose compassion over criticism, we rewrite the story of how we see ourselves and reclaim our power to love ourselves not just when we feel worthy, but especially when we don't. The relationship between the inner critic and inner compassion is ultimately the relationship between fear and love, and the more we choose love, the more we come home to who we truly are. Chapter 4, Boundaries, the Language of Self-Respect, explores one of the most vital yet misunderstood aspects of self-love, the power of setting and honoring personal boundaries as an act of radical self-respect, not rejection. While the word boundaries often carries a negative connotation, suggesting distance, walls, or confrontation, this chapter redefines them as essential expressions of emotional clarity, self-awareness, and inner strength. Boundaries are not about controlling others or shutting people out. Rather, they are about clearly communicating what we need to feel safe, valued, and whole in our relationships and daily lives. They are the invisible lines that protect our energy, our time, our emotional well-being, and our core values. The chapter begins by illustrating how many people struggle with boundaries because they were never taught to see their needs as valid. Growing up in environments where compliance, people-pleasing, or emotional suppression was rewarded often leads to adults who feel guilt or fear when they try to assert themselves. We're conditioned to believe that saying no is selfish, that asking for space is rude, and that prioritizing our needs makes us difficult or unlovable. But Chapter 4 makes it clear that boundaries are not a rejection of others. They reflect deep self-respect. Setting boundaries says, I value myself enough to protect what matters to me. Without boundaries, we exhaust ourselves trying to meet everyone else's expectations while abandoning our own needs, leading to burnout, resentment, and emotional disconnection. This chapter invites readers to consider how often they say yes when they mean no, how often they stay silent to avoid conflict, or how often they feel responsible for other people's emotions. These are signs of blurred or non-existent boundaries, and they drain our self-worth over time. The chapter explores how healthy boundaries create healthier relationships, not by pushing people away, but by inviting them to engage with us in ways that honor mutual respect. Boundaries foster trust because they create clarity, they eliminate guesswork and emotional ambiguity. They help us distinguish between what is ours to carry and what is not. They give us the power to walk away from what hurts, instead of trying to fix or tolerate it endlessly. The chapter also addresses the internal barriers to boundary setting, such as fear of rejection, fear of being misunderstood, or the guilt that arises when we finally start choosing ourselves. These emotions are normal, but they don't mean we're doing something wrong, they mean we're challenging old programming. Readers are reminded that it's okay if setting boundaries feels uncomfortable at first. In fact, that discomfort is often a sign of growth. The more we practice speaking our truth, the more confident we become in honoring it. This chapter offers practical examples of boundaries in action. Saying no to social events when you need rest, ending conversations that become toxic, asking for emotional space when overwhelmed, turning off your phone after work, or choosing to leave relationships where respect is consistently lacking. Each of these actions becomes a declaration, I matter. My well-being matters. And this is the essence of self-love. The chapter distinguishes between different types of boundaries, emotional, physical, mental, energetic, and encourages readers to reflect on where they may be overextending themselves or where they feel drained. It emphasizes that boundaries are not about rigid control, but about conscious choices. They are flexible, situational, and rooted in self-awareness. For example, a boundary with a close friend may look different than one with a coworker, and that's okay. What matters is that the boundary comes from an honest connection to your needs and values. This chapter also challenges the myth that loving others means tolerating everything they do. True love, whether romantic, familial, or platonic, is not about enduring disrespect. It's about creating safe, respectful, and reciprocal spaces where both people can thrive. And that starts with being clear about what we will and will not accept. Readers are reminded that setting a boundary is not about changing someone else's behavior. It's about deciding how we will respond if they continue to violate our limits. This is a powerful shift from reactivity to empowerment. The chapter also offers guidance for those who struggle when others set boundaries with them, emphasizing that receiving a boundary is not a personal attack, but an opportunity to grow in empathy and emotional maturity. When we respect other people's boundaries, we affirm their autonomy, and when we enforce our own, we affirm ours. Ultimately, boundaries, the language of self-respect, teaches that loving yourself means protecting yourself, not from love but from patterns that harm your spirit. It's about giving yourself permission to be honest, to take up space, and to stop shrinking to keep the peace. It's about understanding that your needs are not inconveniences. They are guideposts toward a more authentic, balanced life. Boundaries are how you teach others how to treat you, and perhaps more importantly, how you teach yourself that you are worthy of care, consideration, and peace. As the chapter concludes, it offers the powerful reminder that boundary setting is not a one-time event but a lifelong practice, a form of self-love that grows stronger the more we honor it. Every time you set a boundary, you are not creating distance. You are creating the conditions in which love, trust, and respect can truly grow. Chapter 5, Self-Care Beyond Bubble Baths, invites readers to radically reimagine what true self-care means, moving far beyond surface-level indulgences or aesthetic rituals and into the deeper, more transformative territory of emotional honesty, sustainable habits, and intentional living. While society has popularized self-care as bubble baths, face masks, scented candles, or luxurious getaways, this chapter gently challenges that narrative and offers a more grounded, meaningful definition. Self-care is not an escape from your life. It's the commitment to building a life you don't need to constantly escape from. It's about making decisions, both big and small, that honor your mental, emotional, physical, and spiritual well-being on a consistent basis. This includes doing the hard and often unglamorous work of setting boundaries, saying no, attending therapy, drinking enough water, going to bed on time, leaving toxic relationships, and doing the things you've been avoiding even when they're uncomfortable. True self-care is about asking yourself what you need, and then being brave enough to give it to yourself, even when it means disappointing others or disrupting long-standing patterns of self-neglect. The chapter explores how real self-care can often be inconvenient, boring, or emotionally taxing. It's canceling plans because you're emotionally drained, it's waking up early to move your body when you'd rather sleep in, it's ending a relationship that no longer aligns with your values, or finally sitting down to face your finances rather than numbing your anxiety with distractions. While bubble baths and spa days are valid and enjoyable expressions of care, they cannot replace the deeper emotional maintenance that helps us truly thrive. This chapter encourages the reader to look inward and ask, am I tending to my needs in a way that replenishes me, or am I performing a version of self-care that looks good but leaves me unchanged? The honest answer to that question often reveals how much of our self-care has been shaped by consumerism, trends, or avoidance, rather than by real self-awareness. Self-care, as presented here, becomes a form of radical responsibility, not because we must do everything alone, but because no one can meet our needs if we are disconnected from them ourselves. It means learning how to soothe your own nervous system, how to speak kindly to yourself after a failure, how to forgive yourself for past mistakes, and how to advocate for your own healing. This chapter explains that sustainable self-care is built on a foundation of self-respect, not just self-indulgence. It's not about treating yourself as a reward for burnout, it's about not burning out in the first place. It's about listening when your body whispers instead of waiting until it screams. The chapter also dives into the emotional side of self-care, how it means feeling your feelings instead of stuffing them down, asking for help when you're overwhelmed, allowing yourself to grieve losses you never fully processed, and releasing the pressure to be constantly productive. Rest, in this context, becomes an act of rebellion in a world that glorifies hustle. Saying, I deserve peace, becomes a radical affirmation in a culture that praises constant output. The chapter invites readers to redefine productivity to include emotional regulation, spiritual nourishment, and joy. It reminds us that self-care is also about connection, surrounding yourself with people who see you, accept you, and support your growth. Sometimes, self-care means outgrowing old versions of yourself and letting go of identities that no longer fit. It's recognizing when you've been shrinking to fit into spaces that don't honor your full humanity and choosing instead to expand. The chapter acknowledges that for many people, especially those raised in environments where their needs were dismissed or punished, self-care can feel unnatural, selfish, or even dangerous. Reclaiming self-care in those cases means unlearning years of conditioning that taught you survival over nourishment, silence over truth, and sacrifice over self-honoring. This chapter validates that process and encourages readers to go gently, reminding them that real self-care is not a performance, it's a practice. You don't have to get it perfect. You just must stay in relationship with yourself long enough to know what you truly need. The chapter provides examples of emotional self-care, such as journaling, setting emotional boundaries, or practicing self-forgiveness. Physical self-care, like nourishing your body, moving regularly, or attending medical appointments. Mental self-care, such as limiting information overload or challenging negative thoughts. And spiritual self-care, connecting with something greater than yourself, whether through nature, prayer, creativity, or stillness. Each of these domains is explored not as a checklist, but as a holistic invitation to build a life rooted in balance and self-awareness. The chapter closes with the reminder that self-care is not a luxury, it's a birthright. It's not about being selfish, it's about being self-connected. And when you are deeply connected to yourself, everything else, your work, your relationships, your sense of purpose, begins to flow from a place of alignment instead of depletion. Real self-care doesn't ask, what will make me feel better for 5 minutes? But rather, what will support me in becoming the person I want to be long-term? It's not always pretty. It's not always Instagram-mable. But it's always worth it. In choosing to care for ourselves in this real, raw, and responsible way, we declare to ourselves and to the world, I am worth the effort it takes to thrive. Chapter 6, Forgiving Yourself, is a powerful and deeply emotional exploration of one of the hardest, yet most essential acts of self-love, learning how to release yourself from the grip of shame, guilt, and regret by embracing the healing journey of self-forgiveness. This chapter begins by acknowledging an undeniable truth, that we all carry moments we wish we could rewrite, decisions we regret, people we hurt, promises we broke, or times when we betrayed our own values in fear, confusion, or pain. Whether it's a mistake we made years ago or a recent lapse in judgment, the weight of self-blame can become a silent anchor, dragging down our self-worth and distorting the way we see ourselves. Forgiveness, especially of oneself, is not about denying accountability or pretending the past didn't happen. It's about meeting our own imperfection with compassion instead of condemnation. The chapter guides readers to understand that holding on to guilt may feel like penance, but it often serves as a barrier to healing. Shame tells us, "You are broken," while forgiveness says, "You are human and you are learning." The distinction is life-changing. Many people were raised to believe that forgiveness must be earned, that we are only worthy of love when we're flawless, or that to forgive ourselves is to let ourselves off the hook too easily. But this chapter gently challenges that belief, showing that forgiveness is not a free pass, it is an act of courage. It takes immense strength to sit with our past honestly, to face the discomfort of what we've done or failed to do, and to say to ourselves, "Even here, I am still worthy of healing." Self-forgiveness does not mean forgetting the consequences of our actions or excusing harm we've caused. Rather, it means taking responsibility with a compassionate heart, learning from our experiences, making amends where possible, and choosing to grow instead of remaining frozen in shame. This chapter describes how true self-forgiveness is a process, not a moment. It often requires us to grieve the version of ourselves we thought we had to be, and to slowly replace the voice of the inner critic with one of understanding. It is not linear. Some days we feel peace and other days we are pulled back into old patterns of self-blame. But every time we choose to return to ourselves with gentleness instead of judgment, we deepen our healing. The chapter explores how unhealed guilt often manifests as self-sabotage, perfectionism, people-pleasing, or emotional numbness, ways we try to earn redemption by overperforming or punishing ourselves. But healing can only truly begin when we shift from proving we're good enough to believing we are still worthy, even when we've been at our worst. Forgiving yourself also means releasing the toxic belief that you must keep reliving your pain to prove that you care. You can care deeply about what happened and still allow yourself to heal. You can take accountability and still choose joy. The chapter offers practical guidance, encouraging readers to write letters to their younger selves, to name the specific things they feel guilty for, to explore the root causes behind those choices, fear, trauma, insecurity, and to begin reparenting themselves from a place of compassion rather than punishment. It also emphasizes that many of our past choices were made with the awareness and tools we had at the time. When we know better, we can do better, but punishing ourselves forever for not knowing sooner keeps us stuck in the past. Self-forgiveness allows us to say, "I didn't handle that well, but I'm committed to growing from it," and to release ourselves from the impossible burden of being perfect. The chapter also touches on the spiritual side of forgiveness. How many traditions view it as sacred, as an act that brings us closer to grace, to peace, and to our true essence. Forgiveness becomes a bridge between who we were and who we are becoming. It reconnects us to ourselves. Without it, we carry invisible chains of self-hatred that dim our ability to love fully, dream freely, and live authentically. Forgiving yourself doesn't mean the hurt disappears. It means you no longer allow it to define you. This chapter acknowledges how painful it can be to look back and confront what we wish we could undo, but it also offers hope. The past can shape us without having to own us. The stories we carry can become sources of wisdom instead of wounds if we choose to reinterpret them through a lens of compassion. In the end, the chapter reminds readers that the relationship we have with ourselves sets the tone for every other relationship in our lives. And when we practice self-forgiveness, we create space for deeper connection, vulnerability, and empathy with others too. We learn to offer grace more easily because we've learned to extend it inward. As the chapter concludes, it offers this powerful truth. Forgiving yourself is not a one-time act, but a daily decision to stop punishing yourself for being human. It is a form of radical self-love to look at your past and say, "I see you, I understand why you did what you did, and I love you enough to set you free." When we do this, we no longer must live as prisoners of our past. We become stewards of our healing, authors of our next chapter, and believers in our own capacity to rise, again and again with love. Chapter 7, Loving Yourself in a Relationship, explores one of the most delicate and transformative aspects of self-love. Maintaining a strong sense of self while deeply connecting with another. It gently dismantles the myth that love must involve losing yourself in someone else and instead reframes love as a space where two whole individuals meet, not to complete each other, but to share a journey rooted in mutual respect, emotional honesty, and individual growth. This chapter begins by addressing the common tendency to abandon parts of ourselves in the name of connection, shrinking to keep peace, silencing needs to avoid rejection, or adapting our identity to match a partner's expectations. These habits are often rooted in early conditioning where love was conditional, and thus, survival taught us to prioritize others over ourselves. But true love does not require self-abandonment, it requires self-awareness. The chapter powerfully asserts that the foundation of a healthy relationship is self-love, because when you truly know and value yourself, you're able to show up with clarity, communicate your needs with confidence, and choose partners from a place of worth, not woundedness. Loving yourself in a relationship doesn't mean being distant, rigid, or self-centered. Rather, it means remaining deeply connected to your own values, boundaries, and emotional needs even while you are emotionally invested in someone else. This balance is challenging, especially for those who have spent years equating love with sacrifice or fear intimacy because it threatens their sense of autonomy. The chapter invites readers to examine how they show up in relationships. Do you overgive and expect little in return? Do you depend on your partner's validation to feel secure? Do you lose sight of your identity outside of the relationship? These patterns, while understandable, often stem from unmet inner needs that no partner can permanently fill. Real self-love teaches us that it is not our partner's job to fix us, heal our past, or be everything to us. It is our job to love ourselves enough that we can receive love without losing ourselves in the process. The chapter discusses the difference between interdependence, healthy mutual support, and codependence, losing your sense of self in another, and it emphasizes that thriving relationships are those where both people are committed not just to the relationship, but to their own growth. It explores how loving yourself means being able to express your needs without guilt, to say no without fear, to be vulnerable without collapsing into self-doubt, and to know that your worth is not dependent on someone else's ability to love you right. Loving yourself in a relationship also involves emotional boundaries, not walls but clarity. It's knowing what's yours to carry and what's not. It's recognizing that someone else's bad day isn't your fault, that their triggers are not your failures, and that you're allowed to take up emotional space too. This kind of self-love creates the conditions for deeper, more honest intimacy because it removes the silent resentment, emotional overfunctioning, and hidden fear that often sabotage connection. This chapter offers practical ways to cultivate this inner strength. Journaling regularly to stay grounded in your truth, maintaining friendships and hobbies outside the relationship, engaging in self-reflection when triggered, and having open conversations about needs, dreams, and deal breakers. It encourages readers to be honest about whether they are choosing love from a place of fullness or from fear of being alone. The difference is profound. When you love yourself, you choose relationships that enhance your peace, not ones that constantly threaten it. You stop confusing drama with passion or pain with love. The chapter acknowledges that self-love in a relationship also means knowing when to walk away. It's about having the courage to leave when your values are consistently dishonored, when your mental health is at risk, or when staying means abandoning your true self. This kind of self-respect is difficult, especially when your heart still hopes things will change, but the chapter reminds readers that love should not cost your self-worth. It's better to heal from the grief of letting go than to live in the quiet despair of staying small. Equally important, the chapter speaks to those in healthy, loving relationships, showing that self-love is still necessary there too. Even in the best partnerships, challenges arise. Loving yourself means you can face conflict without losing perspective, can apologize without shame, can grow without resentment, and can celebrate your partner's independence without insecurity. It allows you to love with openness instead of fear, knowing that your happiness is not dependent on someone else's mood or decisions. In this way, self-love becomes the most powerful foundation for lasting love. Not because it guarantees that everything will be perfect, but because it ensures that you will not abandon yourself no matter what happens. The chapter closes with a reminder that the relationship you have with yourself sets the tone for every connection you create. Loving yourself in a relationship means committing to never make another person your only source of happiness or identity. It means honoring your intuition, prioritizing your peace, and showing up for your partner with a full heart, not one that is waiting to be rescued. This chapter is a call to recognize that true love is not about losing yourself. It's about becoming more of who you are and inviting someone else to walk beside you in that becoming. It's about understanding that your worth is not negotiable, your needs are not too much, and your self-love is not a threat. It's the very soil in which real, lasting love can bloom. Chapter 8, Becoming Your Own Safe Place, is a deeply transformative invitation to shift the way we relate to ourselves, not as our harshest critic or biggest threat, but as a compassionate ally, a grounding force, and a source of inner refuge in a world that often feels chaotic, unpredictable, or unkind. The chapter begins by recognizing a common experience. Many of us spend years looking for safety outside of ourselves, believing we'll finally feel at peace when someone else loves us unconditionally, when life gets easier, when we achieve something great, or when the pain finally stops. But waiting for the world to feel safe before we can feel safe is like standing in a storm waiting for the rain to ask permission to fall. Real safety doesn't come from perfect circumstances. It comes from building the ability to hold yourself, soothe yourself, and stand by yourself no matter what's happening around you. Becoming your own safe place means creating an internal environment where your thoughts, emotions, and needs are met with kindness, not judgment, where your struggles are not dismissed but held with tenderness, and where your pain is not proof of your failure, but a signal that something inside you is asking to be seen, heard, and healed. The chapter dives into how, for many, the idea of feeling safe with oneself can feel foreign or even frightening, especially if your inner world has been shaped by trauma, criticism, or neglect. If you were taught that your feelings were too much, your needs were a burden, or your identity was somehow wrong, it makes sense that your default inner voice might be one of blame, shame, or fear. But this chapter reminds readers that healing is possible, and that safety is something we can learn to create. One breath, one boundary, one moment of self-compassion at a time. Becoming your own safe place starts with choosing to listen to yourself gently. It means noticing when you're spiraling into self-criticism and consciously choosing to speak to yourself as you would to a child who is scared or hurting, not with harshness but with warmth. It's shifting the inner dialogue from "what's wrong with me?" to "what do I need right now?" It's recognizing that your emotions aren't enemies to be controlled, they're messages to be respected. This chapter teaches that emotional safety is not about always being happy, but about knowing that you can handle whatever comes up without abandoning yourself in the process. When you become your own safe place, you stop outsourcing your stability to how others treat you or how perfectly your life is going. You begin to develop emotional resilience, the quiet power of knowing that even when life shakes, you don't have to crumble. The chapter explores daily practices that support this self-rootedness, such as breath work, mindfulness, grounding techniques, and writing down your thoughts without judgment. These aren't just trendy tools. They are ways of slowly reparenting your nervous system, building trust in your body, and teaching your mind that it's safe to feel, to rest, and to be human. The chapter also discusses the importance of boundaries, not as walls but as loving limits that protect your peace. When you become your own safe place, you no longer tolerate relationships or environments that consistently make you feel unsafe, unseen, or unworthy. You learn to say no, not to punish others but to say yes to yourself. This form of self-loyalty becomes your anchor. It helps you stay grounded when life throws curveballs, and it allows you to walk away from anything that jeopardizes your self-respect. The chapter compassionately acknowledges that building this internal safety can be a slow, non-linear process, especially if your past involved betrayal, emotional neglect, or abandonment. But it also reassures you that you are not broken, you are rebuilding. Each time you meet your pain with patience, each time you stay present instead of numbing out, each time you choose self-understanding over self-judgment, you are laying bricks for your inner sanctuary. Becoming your own safe place also means being honest with yourself, acknowledging what hurts, what you want, and what you're afraid of without shame. It's standing in your truth even when it's uncomfortable. It's trusting your intuition instead of second-guessing your every decision. It's allowing yourself to cry without calling it weakness, to rest without earning it, to feel joy without guilt. This chapter emphasizes that when you build this kind of relationship with yourself, your external world begins to shift too. Not because everything becomes easier but because you are no longer so easily knocked over by it. You carry your peace within you. You become a calming presence to yourself in times of stress, a voice of encouragement when you fall, and a source of steadiness in relationships because you're no longer demanding others regulate your worth for you. You stop asking the world to give you what you haven't yet given yourself. The chapter closes with a beautiful truth. Being your own safe place doesn't mean you never lean on others. It means you choose relationships that honor the safety you've built. It means you love from wholeness, not from a hole. It means that even on your loneliest days, you are never truly alone, because you've learned to sit with yourself with grace, to listen with care, and to stay with yourself no matter what. In becoming your own safe place, you give yourself the greatest gift of all, the freedom to be fully, unapologetically, and tenderly human-held, not by perfection or performance, but by your own unwavering presence. Conclusion. The conclusion of The Power of Self-Love serves as a heartfelt and empowering reminder that the journey of loving yourself is not a destination you reach once and for all, but a lifelong practice, a commitment to returning to yourself again and again with compassion, patience, and honesty. It ties together every chapter's insight by emphasizing that self-love is not about vanity, perfection, or isolation. It is about deep acceptance, radical care, and the unwavering belief that you are worthy, here and now, not because of what you've done but because of who you are. The book closes by revisiting the core truth that your relationship with yourself sets the foundation for everything else in your life. Your relationships, your decisions, your boundaries, your peace, and your purpose. When you treat yourself with gentleness instead of judgment, when you speak to yourself with respect instead of ridicule, when you forgive yourself for your past and honor your growth, you are planting the seeds for a life that feels authentic and fulfilling, not one driven by fear, shame, or external approval. The conclusion gently reminds you that self-love is not always loud or visible. Sometimes, it looks like quietly choosing rest over burnout, like walking away from what hurts even when it's familiar, or like standing up for yourself in small, consistent ways. It's the inner shift that says, I no longer need to earn my worth, I am already enough. Throughout the book, you've learned that self-love is not linear. It rises and falls, it deepens over time, and it often reveals itself most powerfully in moments of struggle, not just joy. The conclusion encourages you to keep going even when it feels hard, and to remember that healing is not about becoming someone else. It's about returning to who you've always been beneath the wounds, expectations, and noise. It affirms that you can be both a work in progress and worthy of love right now. That you can have fears and still act with courage. That you can honor your pain without becoming it. The chapter also revisits the importance of boundaries, self-compassion, and forgiveness as ongoing tools, not one-time acts. You don't have to fix yourself to deserve care, you simply need to show up for yourself, day by day with honesty and love. Becoming your own safe place, your biggest ally, your fiercest protector, and your most trusted friend is the real power of self-love, and it ripples outward into every area of your life. As the conclusion unfolds, it also challenges the societal narrative that your value lies in how much you achieve, how much you give, or how perfectly you perform. Instead, it invites you to reclaim your power by slowing down, listening inward, and living from a place of self-trust. When you operate from love instead of lack, you make different choices that honor your truth, protect your peace, and align with your purpose. You begin to magnetize relationships and experiences that reflect the respect and tenderness you've cultivated within. The conclusion also reminds you that setbacks, relapses, and emotional storms are not signs that you've failed. They are opportunities to return to yourself with even deeper compassion. Every time you choose not to abandon yourself when things get messy, you are practicing self-love in its most powerful form. You are saying, I am still worthy even now. That kind of self-loyalty cannot be faked, bought, or given by someone else. It can only be built from within. This closing chapter also speaks to the ripple effect of self-love in the world. How one person learning to love themselves can create a chain reaction of kindness, boundary setting, healing, and truth-telling in their families, communities, and workplaces. By choosing to love yourself, you give others permission to do the same. Your healing doesn't just benefit you, it breaks cycles, softens hearts, and expands what's possible for those around you. The conclusion ends with an invitation, not to strive harder, but to surrender more gently to who you already are. To trust your inner voice. To let your worthiness be unconditional. And to carry forward everything you've learned, not as rules to follow, but as truths to return to whenever you need them. The journey of self-love is not always easy, but it is always worth it. You are not behind. You are not broken. You are not too late. You are exactly where you're meant to be. The power of self-love is not that it makes life perfect, but that it gives you the strength to live life honestly, bravely, and with your whole heart. And that, above all else, is your greatest superpower.